Sing this, Mozart, and I'll marry you," Ethan Brooks said with a smirk, his voice laced with amusement. The words floated into the lavish ballroom, a playful challenge to the girl standing at the edge of the room. His gaze was sharp, dismissive, as he surveyed the crowd around him. A typical night for the young heir to one of the largest tech empires in the world. His father's wealth was a fortress, and Ethan stood as its proud heir, a man who saw no need for humility. Yet, what he didn't see, what he couldn't possibly understand, was that his joke would set into motion a moment that would change everything. Emma Harris, the daughter of the housekeeper, stood frozen. She was used to being invisible in rooms like this, where the richest people in the world rubbed elbows without a second thought. Dressed in a simple, unassuming dress, her long dark hair pulled back into a tight ponytail, Emma had never been the type to demand attention. Her life had been a quiet one, filled with the sounds of cleaning, serving, and keeping her head down. Her mother, Abigail, worked tirelessly as the Brooks family's housekeeper, a position that Emma had known her entire life. But tonight, as the words of the billionaire's son rang in her ears, something inside her stirred. Ethan had always treated her as if she didn't belong, and now, in front of an entire room of high society elites, he had reduced her to a mere joke. But Emma wasn't just the quiet girl standing in the corner. She had a secret, one that few knew about. She had a voice, and it was a voice that could shatter the illusions built by men like Ethan. With every passing second, her heart raced. The room, opulent and filled with the scent of expensive perfumes and finely crafted furniture, seemed to close in on her. She had never felt smaller. The chandeliers above sparkled like stars in the sky, casting a golden glow on the marble floors. The guests, in their tailored suits and designer gowns, looked like figures from a different world, a world she didn't belong to. But then, a memory flashed in her mind. It was of her mother's old music box, the one she had played for her when she was a little girl. The soft, melodic tune of Mozart filled their tiny apartment, a sound that had always brought Emma comfort. "Sing," her mother had whispered. "Let the music lift you, let it free you." And now, in this moment of humiliation, Emma's body began to respond. She stood taller, her nerves still trembling, but her resolve hardening. The piano in the corner of the room caught her eye, its sleek black surface gleaming in the dim light. She walked toward it slowly, the murmurs of the guests fading into the background. Ethan's smirk deepened as she approached, clearly amused by her decision to accept his challenge. "What's the matter, Emma? Afraid you might actually sing?" he mocked, his friends chuckling in the distance. But Emma's hands were steady as she placed them on the piano keys. The first note echoed through the room, a pure, powerful sound that stunned the crowd into silence. Emma closed her eyes, her voice lifting effortlessly into the air as she sang Mozart's Lacrimosa. The notes flowed from her lips, smooth and perfect, every word infused with a depth of emotion that no one in the room had expected. She sang like the music was a part of her, like it had always been there, waiting for the right moment to break free. The guests, once filled with laughter and chatter, were now still, their eyes wide with disbelief. Ethan's expression faltered as he watched her, his confident posture slowly crumbling. He couldn't believe what he was witnessing. The girl he had mocked, the one he thought was nothing more than a servant, was standing before him, her voice more powerful than any of the elites in the room could have imagined. By the time Emma's final note rang out, there was no sound left in the room but the soft hum of the chandelier above. Ethan stood frozen, his face flushed with embarrassment. The guests, in awe, began to murmur among themselves, unsure of how to process what they had just witnessed. Ethan opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The smugness, the arrogance, the superiority, everything he had built himself upon, had crumbled in an instant. Emma, with her simple dress and unassuming demeanor, had just proven that talent and power don't always come in the form of wealth. As the room remained silent, Emma stood there, her chest rising and falling with each breath, a small but victorious smile tugging at the corners of her lips. As the last note of Emma's song lingered in the air, a stunned silence fell over the room. Ethan Brooks, still standing by the grand piano, blinked in disbelief. His world, so carefully crafted on wealth and power, suddenly seemed fragile, like glass teetering on the edge of a cliff. The guests, who had been whispering and laughing only moments before, were now paralyzed with awe. No one spoke. No one moved. The only sound that filled the room was the soft hum of the chandelier above, casting long shadows over the marble floors. Emma stood tall, her heart racing, but her eyes were steady, focused on the keys beneath her hands. She had done it. She had shown them all. She had proven her worth without saying a word. Ethan, unable to process what had just happened, opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He had thought she was just a maid's daughter, a person to be ignored, to be dismissed. Yet here she was, singing with the kind of skill that most professional opera singers could only dream of. His ego, inflated by years of privilege, began to deflate with every passing second. He wanted to say something, anything, to regain control of the situation, but the words stuck in his throat. As he stood there, his face flushed with embarrassment, Emma allowed herself a brief smile. It wasn't out of pride, but rather a quiet satisfaction. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she truly belonged in that room, like she wasn't just the background noise in someone else's story. The room slowly began to stir. Whispers filled the air, soft at first, then growing louder. "Did you hear that?" someone asked, their voice trembling. "She's incredible," another voice responded, disbelief still hanging in the air. A few moments later, someone clapped. Then another. And soon, the entire room erupted into applause. Ethan, still in shock, remained motionless. It was as if the applause was meant for someone else, someone who had earned the right to stand in the spotlight. But Emma wasn't used to this kind of attention. She wasn't used to being the center of anything. For a moment, she thought she might shrink back, retreat into the corner where she had always been, the place she had always known. But something inside her held her ground. She had earned this. She deserved this. Ethan finally managed to break free from his stupor. His eyes narrowed as he approached her, a hint of begrudging admiration creeping into his gaze. "I didn't know you could sing like that," he said, his voice almost soft, almost respectful. Emma didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her silence was louder than any words she could have spoken. Instead, she gave him a look, a brief glance that spoke volumes. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer just the maid's daughter. She was Emma Harris, and in that moment, she had changed everything. The guests, still murmuring excitedly about her performance, began to turn their attention back to their champagne glasses and hors d'oeuvres. But the energy in the room had shifted. Ethan's arrogance had been replaced by a subtle but undeniable sense of respect. He wasn't sure when it had happened, but in that brief, powerful moment, Emma had taken her place in the world. She had shown him, and everyone else in the room, that worth was not measured by the size of your bank account or the name on your family crest. It was measured by the depth of your heart, the strength of your spirit, and the power of your voice. Ethan's life, once centered around his family's empire, had been shaken to its core. For the first time, he realized there was more to life than money and status. And the person who had shown him that was someone he had once thought he could easily dismiss. But Emma's story was far from over. The applause died down, but the impression she left on everyone in the room would last far longer. She had changed their perceptions. And as for Ethan, he would never look at her, or anyone else, in the same way again. The room remained eerily quiet as the applause died down, but the weight of the moment lingered in the air. Emma stood at the piano, her hands still resting lightly on the keys, her breath coming in slow, steady intervals. The guests slowly began to return to their conversations, but the spark of recognition in their eyes was unmistakable. For the first time, they saw her, not just as the maid's daughter, but as someone who belonged in that room, in that world. Ethan Brooks, who had once looked down on her with so much arrogance, now stood at a distance, his gaze no longer dismissive but filled with a complex mixture of respect and awe. It was as if the very foundation of the world he had always known had shifted beneath his feet. He had made a joke, a casual challenge that he thought would be an easy win, something to laugh about with his friends. But instead, Emma had turned his mockery into a moment of undeniable brilliance. The room began to murmur with admiration, but Emma remained quiet. She didn't need their approval. The satisfaction of the moment was enough for her. Her heart was still racing, the adrenaline of the performance slowly fading, but there was a new sense of clarity within her. She had never wanted fame, never desired to be the center of attention. But in that instant, She had proven something far more important, her worth. And it wasn't about the applause or the attention. It was about the fact that she had stood up in front of the very people who had underestimated her and shown them the strength of her voice. Ethan, unsure of what to do next, finally approached her. He cleared his throat, his usual smug confidence now tempered by a rare moment of vulnerability. "That was incredible," he said, his words tentative, almost as if he were testing them. "I had no idea." Emma turned to face him, her expression calm but unwavering. She didn't smile, but the flicker of something, pride, perhaps, was evident in her eyes. "You never asked," she replied simply, her voice steady. There was no bitterness, no anger, just the quiet truth of the moment. Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but the words caught in his throat. For the first time, he didn't know what to say. All the power he had relied on for so long, his wealth, his status, his connections, suddenly seemed irrelevant. Emma, standing there in her simple dress, had shown him a kind of power he had never understood. She had shown him the power of resilience, the power of quietly refusing to be dismissed. The guests were still talking, still processing the unexpected turn of events. Some were whispering among themselves, marveling at Emma's performance, while others seemed to be evaluating Ethan's reaction, waiting to see how he would handle this new development. But Ethan was no longer the center of attention. The eyes of the room had shifted from him to Emma, and he couldn't help but feel the weight of that shift. For the first time, he realized that his wealth and status didn't make him untouchable. He wasn't the one who held all the cards anymore. The room was no longer just his to command. Emma's presence had changed everything. Ethan cleared his throat, his shoulders slumping slightly. "I didn't expect that," he muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. Emma didn't respond. She didn't need to. She had already said everything that needed to be said with her performance. As the night continued, the guests began to disperse, but Emma's name was now on their lips, whispered in awe and disbelief. She was no longer the invisible girl in the corner, the one who had to blend into the background. She was someone they would all remember. And as for Ethan, he would never look at her the same way again. He would never be able to forget the moment she had stood up, not just for herself, but for anyone who had ever been overlooked, underestimated, or ignored. Emma's journey was far from over, but in that one moment, she had changed the narrative. She had rewritten the rules. As the night wore on, the energy in the grand hall shifted. The earlier discomfort had turned into quiet admiration, but for Emma, the moment still felt surreal. She had not expected the world to change in an instant. But that's exactly what had happened. The soft hum of conversation that had surrounded her for so long had been replaced by whispers of awe. As the crowd began to thin, a few guests approached her, their words hesitant, as though unsure of how to speak to her now. "That was amazing," one woman said, her voice filled with genuine admiration. Emma smiled politely, but her eyes stayed focused on the piano. She wasn't interested in the praise. It wasn't about the applause or recognition. It was about something much deeper, something that had always been inside her, waiting to be acknowledged. In the corner of her eye, she saw Ethan still standing by the piano, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Gone was the smirk, replaced by a quiet contemplation. As Emma moved to leave the room, she felt the weight of his gaze on her, but she didn't let it faze her. She had learned, over the years, that nothing was more powerful than owning your own worth. In the days that followed, Emma found herself at the center of conversations she never imagined she would be a part of. The guests from that night talked about her performance, about the girl who had stunned a room full of powerful, influential people. But more than that, they spoke about the way she had carried herself. She wasn't just talented, she was strong. It was the quiet confidence that had drawn them in, that had changed the entire dynamic of the evening. Ethan, too, seemed to change. Emma noticed him more in the days that followed, but not with the same judgmental eyes. There was no longer the same arrogance in his posture when they crossed paths. Instead, there was a subtle respect, a recognition that he could no longer deny. One afternoon, as Emma was walking down a hallway at the Brooks estate, she passed by Ethan. He was standing near the window, looking out at the view of the sprawling city below. The silence between them was heavy, but not uncomfortable. For the first time, she didn't feel like an outsider in this space. She belonged. Ethan turned his head as she approached, his expression thoughtful. "You've changed everything," he said, his voice quieter than usual. Emma paused, but didn't respond right away. She didn't need to. She had already said everything she needed to say with her voice, with her talent, and with her strength. Instead, she simply nodded, acknowledging his words without the need for any further explanation. As she walked past him, she realized that, for the first time in her life, she was no longer just the maid's daughter. She was someone people looked at, not with pity or disdain, but with admiration. The transformation had been subtle, but profound. And though the path ahead was still uncertain, Emma knew one thing for sure. Her journey had only just begun. Ethan watched her walk away, his mind racing with the realization that he had underestimated her, that he had missed the true value of the person standing right in front of him. In that moment, he understood something he had never fully grasped before. True power didn't come from wealth or status. It came from within, from the quiet strength of a person who knew their worth, no matter how others tried to define them. Emma Harris had proven that. And now, the world was finally beginning to see it too. The days following the event at the Brooks estate seemed to move in slow motion for Emma. She couldn't quite grasp the magnitude of what had happened. Everywhere she went, people looked at her differently. Whispers followed her as she walked through the halls, though they weren't the same whispers that had haunted her for years. These were filled with curiosity, admiration, and even respect. She noticed how the staff began to treat her with a new sense of deference, as if she were no longer just the maid's daughter, but someone worthy of acknowledgement. Ethan, on the other hand, seemed like a shadow of his former self. He wasn't the same arrogant, dismissive figure he had been before. Instead, he was quieter, more contemplative, almost as if he were trying to figure out who he had been before that night, who he was now, and where his place was in a world that had suddenly become much larger than he had imagined. One afternoon, Ethan approached Emma in the garden, a place where she often retreated to find a moment of peace. He stood at a distance, his hands in his pockets, looking almost nervous. "Emma," he began, his voice lacking the usual confidence. She turned to face him, her expression calm, but inside, a mixture of curiosity and wariness stirred. She had no idea what he was going to say, but she wasn't afraid anymore. "I've been thinking," Ethan continued, his voice softer than usual, "about what you did, and about how I've treated you." He paused, as if weighing his words carefully. Emma said nothing, allowing him to find his own way through the conversation. "I was wrong," he said finally, his tone sincere. "I was arrogant, dismissive. I treated you like you didn't matter, and I didn't see what was right in front of me." Emma's gaze softened slightly, but she remained silent. She didn't need to hear an apology. She had already moved past needing one. She had shown him who she was, and that was enough. Ethan took a deep breath, his gaze meeting hers. "You're not just the maid's daughter," he said quietly. "You're someone who can change everything." The words hung in the air, more powerful than any compliment he could have given. Emma nodded, her heart a little lighter, not because of his acknowledgement, but because of the truth in his words. "Thank you," she replied simply, her voice steady. Ethan's expression softened, and for the first time, Emma saw something in him that hadn't been there before, a glimpse of humility. He wasn't perfect, and neither was she. But in that moment, they both understood something fundamental. True strength wasn't about wealth, status, or power. It was about recognizing your own worth and standing firm in it, no matter the world around you. As she walked away from him, Emma felt something shift inside her. She wasn't the same girl who had walked into that ballroom months ago, uncertain and afraid. She was someone new, someone who knew that her voice, her talents, and her strength had value. The world might not always recognize it, but she would no longer let anyone define her. And as for Ethan, Emma realized he was still on his own journey, but he had taken the first step toward understanding that true power came from within. It wasn't about the things you had, but the person you were. The weeks that followed were filled with change. Emma was offered a scholarship to study music at a prestigious conservatory, a dream she had never dared to dream aloud. It felt surreal to think that her future was unfolding in ways she had never imagined. Her mother, Abigail, was overjoyed, though she still couldn't quite believe the turn of events. She had always known Emma was special, but now, the world was beginning to see it too. As Emma packed her things, preparing to leave for the conservatory, she caught one last glimpse of the Brooks estate. She had come a long way from the quiet girl who had cleaned the halls and kept to the shadows. She had proven, in front of the wealthiest people in the room, that she was more than her circumstances. She was more than the expectations placed on her. She was Emma Harris, and she was ready to take on the world. The first day at the conservatory felt like stepping into a new world for Emma. She stood at the entrance of the grand building, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and uncertainty. The towering structure, with its marble columns and grand archways, seemed to pulse with history. Every step she took on the polished floors echoed with the weight of dreams that had been fulfilled and those yet to come. She had always dreamed of being here, but now that the moment had arrived, it felt almost surreal. It wasn't the opulent surroundings that amazed her. It was the possibility of what lay ahead. The other students around her seemed so confident, so certain of their place. Some were already deep in conversation, their voices filled with the language of music theory and performance. Emma felt like an outsider, a girl from a world so different from theirs. Yet, deep down, she knew she belonged. She had earned this, and she would prove it. As the day progressed, Emma was introduced to her professors, each one more intimidating than the last. They spoke in terms she wasn't yet fully familiar with, their expectations clear. But there was something in their eyes when they spoke to her, a spark of curiosity, a recognition that she wasn't just another student. She was something more. Her first lesson was in a small, acoustically perfect room, with a grand piano placed at the center. She had played countless times on pianos in her mother's employer's house, but this one felt different. This one was hers. Her professor, a stern but kind woman named Dr. Walker, watched her closely as she sat down to play. "Play something that speaks to you," Dr. Walker instructed. Emma closed her eyes for a moment, letting the silence wash over her. Then, her fingers moved, as if guided by something beyond herself. The music flowed from her, a beautiful and complex piece by Chopin, a piece she had always loved but never felt worthy enough to perform in front of anyone. As she played, she felt the notes fill the room, reverberating off the walls and into the corners of her soul. It was a moment of pure connection between her and the music, something she had longed for all her life. When the last note rang out, Emma opened her eyes, her chest rising and falling with the weight of the performance. Dr. Walker was silent for a long moment, and Emma's heart began to race. Had she played too long? Was it not enough? Finally, Dr. Walker spoke. "You have a rare gift," she said, her voice soft but filled with authority. "You have the potential to go beyond the classroom, but you will have to work harder than you ever have before." Emma nodded, her throat tight with emotion. She had worked hard her whole life, but now, for the first time, it felt like that hard work was being recognized. It wasn't just the music, it was who she was becoming. As the days turned into weeks, Emma's confidence began to grow. She poured herself into her lessons, practicing for hours each day, determined to prove that she belonged here. The other students slowly began to notice her, and though they were initially distant, they started to respect her. She was no longer just the girl who had stumbled into this world by chance. She was the girl who had earned her place, who had the talent and drive to succeed. One afternoon, as Emma walked across campus, she heard her name called. She turned to find Ethan standing at the entrance of the music hall, looking out of place in his casual clothes. He smiled when he saw her, a smile that seemed different from the cocky grin she had seen at the Brooks estate. "I didn't expect to find you here," Ethan said, his voice a little uncertain. "I thought you were busy with your music." Emma smiled back, but there was no arrogance in her expression, just the quiet confidence that had grown in her over the past few weeks. "I am," she replied simply, "and I'm where I'm supposed to be." Ethan's smile faded a little, replaced by something more thoughtful. He seemed to hesitate for a moment before speaking again. "I've been watching you," he said, his voice almost embarrassed. "And I want to say, I was wrong. I didn't see who you really were." Emma didn't respond right away. She didn't need to. She had already shown him, and everyone else, who she was. Ethan stood there for a moment, his eyes meeting hers. There was no judgment, no superiority, just understanding. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said quietly, "but I wanted you to know that I see you now, and I'm proud of what you've become." Emma's heart was still, her gaze steady as she nodded. She wasn't looking for his approval anymore. She had already earned her place. The rest of the world would have to catch up. With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Ethan standing there, a man who had once tried to define her but now saw her for who she truly was. As she walked toward the music hall, the future ahead of her felt clear. She wasn't just Emma Harris anymore. She was a force of nature, ready to change the world, one note at a time. Emma stood at the edge of the concert hall, her fingers tapping nervously against the black grand piano. She had never imagined she would be here, performing for an audience that included some of the most influential figures in the classical music world. The applause she had received at the conservatory felt like a distant memory now. The pressure to perform at this level was different. This wasn't just a class recital. It was the culmination of everything she had worked for, everything she had dreamed of. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. Taking a deep breath, she adjusted her posture and positioned her hands on the keys. Her mind cleared as she focused solely on the music. It was a piece by Beethoven, one she had learned by heart, one that spoke to her in a way words never could. The opening notes echoed through the hall, and Emma's fingers flowed effortlessly across the keys. As the music built, her confidence grew. She lost herself in the sound, in the rhythm, in the power of the notes that filled the space around her. The audience was entranced, their eyes fixed on her, their attention unwavering. Emma didn't see them anymore. She didn't see the imposing figures of the critics in the front row, or the students who watched her with curiosity and admiration. She saw only the music. The energy of the room seemed to shift as she reached the climax of the piece. It was as though the very air had become electric, charged with the intensity of her performance. For those few minutes, she was no longer the quiet girl from the Brooks estate, no longer the maid's daughter. She was Emma Harris, a pianist whose talent transcended every limitation that had once been placed upon her. When the final note rang out, Emma's fingers hovered above the keys for a moment, the last vestiges of the music fading into silence. The room remained still, as if suspended in time. Then, slowly, the applause began. It was not the polite, measured applause of a formal performance. It was a wave of genuine appreciation. People were standing, clapping, some even shouting their admiration. Emma's heart raced, but she remained composed, her hands resting lightly on the piano. She had done it. She had earned this moment, and it was hers. As she stood and turned to face the audience, her gaze swept across the room. Her professor, Dr. Walker, was smiling, pride in her eyes. A few of the other students nodded in approval, but it was Ethan, sitting quietly near the back of the hall, who caught her attention. He was watching her with an expression of awe, his usual confidence replaced by something else, something far more meaningful. There was no smugness in his smile now, no arrogance, just respect. For a moment, their eyes locked, and Emma felt a sense of closure, not just for herself, but for everything she had gone through. Ethan had once looked down on her, had once seen her as nothing more than a servant. But now, he saw her for who she truly was. She wasn't just the maid's daughter. She was a musician, an artist, and she had earned her place in the world. The applause continued to echo in her ears as she left the stage, the sounds of the audience still reverberating in her mind. But it wasn't the applause that filled her with pride. It was the journey that had brought her here, the growth she had experienced, and the woman she had become. Emma wasn't the same girl who had walked into that ballroom all those months ago, uncertain and afraid. She was someone new, someone who had taken control of her destiny, someone who had proven that talent and hard work could overcome any obstacle. As she left the concert hall that night, Emma knew her journey was far from over. This was only the beginning, and whatever the future held, she was ready for it. The weeks that followed the concert felt like a blur for Emma. The days at the conservatory were filled with practice and new challenges, but there was a quiet confidence that had settled inside her, a feeling that everything she had worked for was finally falling into place. Her performances grew more powerful, more assured, and as the days passed, her professors began to recognize her exceptional talent. But it was not just her musical ability that set her apart. It was the way she carried herself, the way she had transformed from the girl who once hid in the shadows to the woman who now stood in the spotlight. Her classmates, once distant, now sought her out for advice, for inspiration. Emma's name had become synonymous with dedication and grace. But with this newfound attention came a pressure she hadn't fully anticipated. Expectations grew higher. There were more performances, more evaluations, and the weight of the world seemed to press against her with every step. Yet, even in these moments of uncertainty, Emma felt a calm within her, a quiet knowing that she was capable of more than she had ever dreamed. One evening, as she walked through the conservatory's grand hallway, she found herself standing in front of the same piano where her journey had begun. The keys, worn from years of use, seemed to call out to her, as if they were inviting her to continue her story. She had come so far, but she knew there was still much more to achieve. Just as she was about to sit down, she noticed a figure standing in the doorway, a familiar face. Ethan. His presence was unexpected, but not unwelcome. He had been visiting the conservatory for the past few days, attending a performance and a lecture by one of the renowned professors. Their paths had crossed a few times since the night of the concert, but their conversations had always been brief, polite exchanges. Tonight, however, something was different. Ethan smiled when he saw her, and there was a warmth in his expression that hadn't been there before. "I didn't expect to find you here," he said, his voice soft but sincere. Emma raised an eyebrow, her lips curving into a small smile. "It's where I belong," she replied, her words steady, but filled with the truth she had come to realize over the past few months. Ethan stepped into the room, his eyes scanning the piano with an appreciative gaze. "I've been hearing about your performances," he said. "Everyone's talking about you. They say you're going to change the music world." Emma felt a flutter of modesty in her chest. She wasn't used to receiving such praise, especially from someone like Ethan, who had once dismissed her with such ease. "I'm just doing what I love," she said simply. Ethan nodded, a thoughtful look crossing his face. "I know," he said quietly, "but it's more than that. You've done more than just play music. You've changed how people see you, and how they see the world around you." Emma felt a surge of gratitude toward him, though she didn't speak. She didn't need to. He understood, and that was enough. They stood there for a moment, the silence between them comfortable, until Ethan finally spoke again. "I've been thinking about what you said that night. About worth. About what really matters." Emma didn't respond immediately. She didn't need to explain again. Her journey had already proven everything she had wanted to say. "You were right," Ethan continued. "I've spent my life thinking that success came from power, from wealth, from being seen. But you've shown me something different." Emma looked at him, her gaze steady. "Success comes from within," she said softly. Ethan smiled, a genuine smile, as though a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "I think I understand that now," he said. "And I think I'll spend the rest of my life trying to live up to what I've learned from you." Emma didn't need him to apologize for the past. The past was a part of her story, but it no longer defined her. She had moved past it, had grown beyond it. "You don't need to live up to anything," she replied. "Just be yourself. That's enough." And in that moment, Ethan understood. He didn't need to prove anything to her, or to anyone else. He just needed to live his life with the same authenticity and integrity that Emma had shown him. As they stood there in the quiet room, the music of the future seemed to fill the space between them. It wasn't just Emma's music. It was their music, the music of transformation and growth, of learning from one another, of breaking free from the constraints that society had placed upon them. Emma knew that her journey was far from over. There would be more performances, more challenges, more moments of doubt. But she also knew that she was ready. She was ready to face whatever came next, with the same courage and determination that had brought her this far. Because, now, more than ever, she understood the power of her voice, the power of her choices, and the power of her story. As Emma's final year at the conservatory approached, she found herself standing at the threshold of a new chapter in her life. The days of uncertainty had faded, replaced with a deep sense of purpose. The music she played now was no longer just a form of expression. It was a testament to everything she had overcome and everything she had become. Her performances were flawless, each note a reflection of her dedication, each melody a story of resilience. Yet, despite her growing success, Emma knew she hadn't reached this point alone. She thought about her mother, Abigail, who had always believed in her, even when Emma had doubts. She thought about Dr. Walker, her professor, who had pushed her to be better, to dig deeper into her potential. And she thought about Ethan, the man who had once seen her as nothing more than the help, but who now recognized her for the artist she was. The conservatory was preparing for a prestigious recital, an event that would showcase the best students in their final year. Emma had been selected to perform, and the pressure weighed heavily on her. This was her moment, the one she had worked toward for years. She stood in the backstage area, feeling the familiar flutter of nerves that always accompanied a performance. She had played in front of large crowds before, but this felt different. This time, it wasn't just about playing the music. It was about making a statement. She was no longer just Emma Harris, the maid's daughter. She was Emma Harris, the pianist who had earned her place among the greats. As the time for her performance drew closer, Emma closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She let the familiar notes of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata flood her mind, a piece that had always grounded her, that had always calmed her nerves. The music was her anchor, the one thing she could always rely on. She could hear the faint rustling of the audience as they settled into their seats, and the murmurs of excitement that filled the room. She knew they were waiting for her to perform, but she didn't focus on them. She focused on the music, on the connection she had with each note, each pause, each crescendo. When the time came, she stepped onto the stage, the bright lights shining down on her. The audience fell silent, and Emma's heart raced. This was it, the moment she had worked for. As her fingers touched the keys, everything else faded away. The world, the expectations, the past, they all disappeared. It was just her and the music. The sound of the piano filled the hall, soft and haunting at first, then growing bolder, more powerful. Emma's fingers danced over the keys with precision and passion, each movement a reflection of the hours, the years, of practice and dedication. She played with a sense of freedom that she had never known before, allowing herself to be fully immersed in the music. As she reached the final movement, the intensity of the piece matched the intensity of her emotions. Every note she played was an expression of her journey, of the battles she had fought, and the victories she had won. The audience was captivated, their attention fixed on her every movement. When the final note reverberated through the hall, Emma sat still for a moment, letting the music fade into silence. The room remained still, and then, slowly, the applause began. It was not just polite applause. It was a wave of admiration, a recognition of the power of her performance. She stood and took a bow, her heart swelling with pride. This was more than just a performance. It was a culmination of everything she had fought for, everything she had worked toward. Ethan was in the front row, his eyes locked on her. As their gazes met, Emma saw something in his eyes that she had never seen before: respect. He wasn't the same man who had dismissed her all those months ago. He was someone who had come to understand that true greatness was not measured by wealth or status, but by the depth of a person's character and talent. The recital was a turning point for Emma, but it was also a turning point for Ethan. He had witnessed her growth, her transformation, and in that moment, he understood the true power of her journey. Emma had shown him, and everyone in the room, that no matter where you come from, no matter who you are, your worth is determined by your ability to believe in yourself and pursue your dreams with everything you have. As the applause echoed in her ears, Emma knew that this was only the beginning. The world was waiting for her, and she was ready to take it on, one note at a time. Months had passed since Emma's recital, and the world she had once known felt like a distant memory. The bustling conservatory hallways had become her second home, the sounds of piano keys and musical scales now a constant rhythm in her life. But it wasn't just the music that had transformed her. Emma had changed in ways she hadn't anticipated, and with each passing day, she grew more confident in her identity as a musician and as a person. One afternoon, as she walked down the same halls that had once seemed so intimidating, she felt a shift in the air. There was no longer any hesitation in her step, no longer any uncertainty in her mind. The world she had once feared had now become her stage, and she had claimed it. But with her growing success came new challenges. As she prepared for a final performance that would mark the end of her time at the conservatory, Emma faced a different kind of pressure. It wasn't just about playing the perfect piece anymore. It was about what came after. The thought of stepping out into the world, of leaving the safety of the conservatory and facing the unknown, made her stomach twist. It was one thing to perform in front of her peers, in front of professors who had seen her grow. It was another to take that final step into the real world, to prove herself on a stage much bigger than any she had played on before. As the night of her final performance approached, Emma spent hours rehearsing, her fingers moving across the keys in a rhythm she had memorized 1,000 times. Yet, no matter how many times she played the piece, it felt different now. It felt like it was the last time, like this moment marked the end of something and the beginning of something entirely new. She took a deep breath as she sat at the piano, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. The hall was packed, filled with faces she had come to know over the years, professors, students, friends, and even a few familiar faces from the past. But it was Ethan's presence that caught her eye. He had been in the audience for a few of her performances, but tonight, something felt different. He wasn't just watching her play. He was watching her as if he were witnessing the culmination of a journey, her journey. Their eyes met briefly, and she felt the same sense of understanding between them that had started to form months ago. This wasn't about winning his approval or seeking validation. This was about sharing a moment of triumph and self-acceptance. She had made it this far not because of anyone else, but because of her own determination, her own hard work. As the first notes filled the hall, Emma lost herself in the music once again. The piece flowed effortlessly from her fingertips, each note expressing the emotions that had been building inside her for so long. This performance was no longer just a test. It was a celebration of everything she had achieved and everything that still awaited her. The audience was silent, their attention fixed on her every move. It wasn't the applause that mattered anymore. It was the music, the way it made her feel alive, the way it connected her to the world in a way nothing else could. When the final note resonated through the hall, Emma sat still for a moment, letting the silence wash over her. And then, slowly, the applause began. It wasn't just polite clapping. It was a wave of admiration, of respect. The sound of it filled her chest with warmth, but it wasn't the applause she was seeking. It was the knowledge that she had done it. She had made her mark, not just in the music world, but in her own life. She had proven, without a doubt, that she was worthy of every step she had taken. Ethan stood, his hands clapping in earnest, his smile genuine. For a moment, their eyes met across the room, and in that silent exchange, Emma knew that she had come full circle. She was no longer the girl who had been dismissed, who had been underestimated. She was Emma Harris, a musician in her own right, and the world was finally starting to recognize it. As the applause continued, Emma took her bow, not just to the audience, but to herself. She had done it. She had become the person she had always dreamed of being, and nothing would ever take that away from her. Months after her final performance, Emma found herself standing at the edge of a new chapter, yet the world outside the conservatory still seemed vast and unfamiliar. The recognition she had gained from her music was fulfilling, but it was only the beginning of the journey she had yet to fully explore. She had begun to entertain the possibility of taking her talent beyond the safety of her academic world. Invitations to perform in prestigious venues started to arrive, and soon, she found herself in front of even bigger crowds. But with each new performance came the familiar surge of nerves, that quiet doubt that lingered in her mind, even after everything she had already accomplished. It was as if the more success she found, the more she felt the weight of the expectations placed upon her. The echoes of the applause from her recital still resonated in her memory, but now there was a pressure to do more, to keep proving herself. One evening, after a particularly successful performance in a renowned concert hall, Emma found herself walking along the city streets, her thoughts far away. She wasn't sure where she was going or what she was looking for, but there was something about the stillness of the night that drew her in. The city was quiet, the lights casting long shadows on the pavement, and for the first time in weeks, Emma felt a sense of peace. As she walked, her mind drifted to Ethan, who had always been there in the background of her journey. They hadn't spoken much since that night at the recital, but she knew he had been following her success. His presence was still a reminder of how far she had come, not just as a musician, but as a person. She thought about their last conversation, the way he had apologized for his past arrogance, and how, in that moment, he had acknowledged something important. It wasn't about their past or about him understanding her journey. It was about her understanding herself. The more she thought about it, the more she realized how much of her path had been shaped by the people around her, the ones who had seen potential in her when she couldn't see it herself. The music, the applause, the recognition, it was all a reflection of the Inner strength she had unlocked, a strength that she had discovered on her own. As she passed a small cafe, she stopped, drawn in by the soft lights spilling out into the night. It was quiet inside, the hum of quiet conversation filling the space. Emma stepped in and ordered a cup of coffee, her mind still a little distracted. She sat by the window, watching the world outside, and for the first time in a long while, she felt truly alone, but not in a bad way. She wasn't lonely. She was comfortable in her own presence, something she hadn't known how to do before. Just as she was about to take a sip, her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a message from Ethan. "I've been thinking about you, Emma. I wanted to let you know that I'm proud of you, more than you could know." She stared at the message for a long moment, unsure of how to respond. There was something both comforting and bittersweet about his words. It wasn't that she needed his approval, but there was a part of her that had always wondered if he would ever truly understand her. And in this message, he had. She typed a quick response. "Thank you, Ethan. That means more to me than you know." Emma placed the phone down and took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past months lift off her shoulders. She didn't need to prove herself to anyone anymore. The music, her journey, and the person she had become, it was all enough. And as she sat there, savoring the warmth of the coffee and the quiet of the city night, she realized that she was exactly where she needed to be. The future was still uncertain, but it was hers to create. The journey was hers to continue. And no matter where it took her, she was ready. Because Emma Harris, the pianist, the artist, and the woman who had come into her own, was no longer just a dreamer. She was a force. And that, she knew, was more than enough. The night air was cool as Emma walked through the city streets, the hum of the nightlife surrounding her. Her heart felt light, but there was a quiet weight on her shoulders, something she had been carrying for a long time. Despite the recognition, despite the applause, she realized that she still wasn't sure where she was truly headed. The conservatory had been a safe haven, a place where she had found herself and her music. But now, as her final year came to a close, she faced the daunting question, what's next? For weeks, she had been thinking about the possibilities, weighing her options. She could stay in the city, continue performing, or maybe even teach. There were opportunities knocking at her door, doors that would open the world of classical music to her in ways she hadn't yet imagined. But with every opportunity came the fear of losing herself in it. She didn't want to be just another performer. She didn't want to lose the connection she had with the music, the deep, personal bond that had kept her going when no one else believed in her. As she walked, her phone buzzed in her pocket, interrupting her thoughts. It was a message from Dr. Walker, her professor, the one who had guided her through the toughest times. "Emma, I just heard about the recital you did in New York. I'm so proud of you. The world is waiting for you." She smiled softly at the message, feeling a wave of warmth wash over her. Dr. Walker had always been a source of strength for her, and her words meant more than any applause. But even as she appreciated the support, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. What if the world expected her to be something she wasn't? What if she was just a product of the system, a performer who would fade into the background like so many others before her? She paused at a street corner, her thoughts swirling in her mind. She couldn't stay in this place of uncertainty forever. The time had come to make a choice, to take that next step into the unknown. But what step should it be? Just then, she felt a familiar presence beside her. Ethan. She hadn't expected him to be there, but there he was, standing just a few feet away, his hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket. He didn't say anything at first, just watched her with a gentle expression. "I didn't think I'd find you here," he said, his voice soft. Emma turned to face him, a small smile tugging at her lips. "I wasn't sure where I was going," she admitted. Ethan nodded, understanding. They stood there in silence for a few moments, both of them looking out at the street ahead. Finally, he spoke again. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice almost hesitant. "About everything. About what you've done, about how much you've changed. You've come so far, Emma. You've done everything you set out to do." Emma looked at him, her heart full. She had been so focused on the future, so caught up in the expectations of what was next, that she hadn't stopped to appreciate how far she had come. "But I don't know if I'm ready for what's next," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know where I fit in the world beyond this place." Ethan took a step closer, his gaze unwavering. "You're ready," he said simply. "You've always been ready." The world may not know it yet, but they will. Emma felt the weight on her shoulders lift, just a little. Ethan's words, simple as they were, gave her the clarity she had been seeking. She didn't need to have everything figured out right now. The journey wasn't about knowing every step. It was about trusting herself to take the next one, no matter where it led. As they stood there, the world around them seemed to fade into the background. For the first time in a long time, Emma felt at peace with the uncertainty, with the unknown. The future wasn't something to fear. It was something to embrace. And whatever path she chose, she knew she would walk it with the same determination, the same passion, and the same strength that had brought her this far. Emma smiled at Ethan, a smile that held more than just gratitude. It held a quiet sense of certainty. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady. Ethan smiled back, his eyes filled with something deeper than admiration, understanding. Together, they stood there in the calm of the night, two people who had come a long way and had much further to go. And for the first time, Emma knew that she was ready for whatever came next. The days following that quiet conversation with Ethan felt like a new beginning for Emma. She woke up every morning with a sense of purpose, the uncertainty of the past now a distant memory. The world around her had shifted, but it was in a way that felt like she was finally moving toward what she was always meant to do. She began receiving invitations for performances, but this time, it wasn't just about the music. It was about who she was becoming. A person whose talent and resilience were beginning to be recognized by the world. She spent countless hours perfecting her craft, but there was something different in the way she approached her practice now. It wasn't just about impressing others. It was about connecting with the music, allowing it to speak through her in ways she had never done before. As she prepared for a major performance in New York City, the one that would showcase her as a rising star, Emma felt the familiar flutter of nerves. But this time, it wasn't fear. It was excitement. For the first time, she understood the true meaning of performance, not just as an act of showcasing skill, but as an expression of who she was. When the night of the performance arrived, Emma stood backstage, her heart racing with anticipation. The concert hall was filled with the buzz of an eager audience, and she could feel the energy vibrating through the walls. She knew this was a pivotal moment, one that would shape the trajectory of her career, but it didn't scare her. Instead, she felt ready. She had proven to herself, time and time again, that she had the strength and the talent to stand on any stage and leave her mark. As she stepped onto the stage, the spotlight warming her face, Emma took a deep breath and let the music wash over her. The first notes of the piece were gentle, as if the piano were whispering to her, guiding her through the performance. The audience was silent, captivated by her every move. She played with a grace and intensity that she had never fully known before, her fingers dancing across the keys as though the music was a part of her very soul. With each passing minute, she felt herself losing any sense of time or space. The music was the only thing that mattered, and as it filled the hall, Emma felt connected to something far greater than herself. When the final note echoed through the auditorium, she allowed herself a moment of stillness, letting the silence stretch for just a heartbeat. And then, the applause began. It was loud, genuine, and filled with admiration. Emma stood, her heart soaring, knowing that this was more than just a performance. This was a celebration of everything she had worked for, the culmination of a journey that had started in the quietest corners of her life and led her to this stage. As the curtain fell, Emma made her way off stage, her legs shaky but her spirit strong. She had done it. She had shown the world who she was, and they had seen her for what she truly was, a force of nature, a musician who was more than just her circumstances. She didn't need anyone to tell her she had succeeded. The music had spoken for her, and it had carried her farther than she ever thought possible. Later that evening, after the performance, Ethan found her in the quiet of the dressing room, his eyes filled with pride. "You were amazing," he said, his voice genuine. Emma smiled at him, her heart light. "Thank you," she replied simply. There was no need for more words. They both knew that the past had shaped them, but it didn't define them anymore. The future was what mattered now, and they would both face it, side by side, with no more doubts or uncertainties. As Emma left the concert hall that night, the streets of New York City bustling around her, she felt a deep sense of contentment. She wasn't just a pianist. She was Emma Harris, a woman who had found her place in the world, and was ready to take on whatever came next.